Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Welcome to our panel on a very fascinating and important subject on the Me Too movement in the Global South. I'm Joyce Barnathan, the president of the International Center for Journalists, which is a nonprofit based in DC that helps empower journalists around the world. And I will introduce our panelists in a minute, but I just wanted to make a few opening remarks. In the US, and I can speak mostly from the US perspective, the Me Too movement from the bottom up has exposed sexual harassment and intimidation of women in the workforce on a pretty large scale. The same, I think, goes for parts of Europe and other countries. We saw women speak out about cases of harassment largely by very powerful men who often were repeat offenders. And the women named names, and their claims were finally taken seriously. Some argue that this has created a cultural shift in the workforce, and others where demeaning behavior by men is no longer acceptable or considered a normal way to behave. Having lived through decades of what I would call abnormal behavior, I know that I myself accepted the abnormal as normal. Now, I'm dating myself here, but I entered journalism around 1980 after women in the US media had sued on a large scale most of the major news organizations for sexual discrimination. And these cases took place in the 70s, and in every single case that I know of, the women won. And this created the first cracks in the glass ceiling. I say cracks, not necessarily the breakthrough. But the culture hadn't completely changed. We saw women getting into positions, editing positions, and writing positions, and reporting positions, but there was still somewhat of an abnormal culture. And I didn't speak out at times because I simply thought that certain behavior was normal. And I'm just going to give you a few examples before I go to our panelists. When I worked late in the evening as a fact checker at a major news magazine, I believe it was on Friday nights, the male editors would turn on a soft porn TV show and pretty much laugh their way through an hour of watching soft porn. Did I complain? I didn't complain. I thought that was that's just what happened. When a top editor flirted with me and I didn't flirt back, I suddenly found my name taken off bylines of stories. There was no recourse for me to complain or nothing for me to say. And as a correspondent in the Soviet Union in the 80s, a source invited me to meet his family. Very friendly, was a source of the previous correspondent. He picked me up, took me someplace, to his home. Of course, there were no family members there. And, he proceeded to be all over me. And of course, I demanded that I get out of there. I did get out of there, but I didn't even think to tell my bosses about something like this. I did tell a male colleague, the guy who gave me the source, and he basically shrugged it off as like, this is the price of business. You get the picture. Fortunately, the tone has changed in the US, and we'll see if the changes are enduring. But what about the rest of the world? In some places, the movement has caught on. In some places, it hasn't. And there were also significant Me Too movements before the Me Too movement that we'll talk about. So it wasn't that US women invented the cause. So we're going to look in this panel. We have women from Argentina, from India and Kenya, who can talk very specifically about their countries, but we'll try to also take a broader look at what may be happening on the continent or the subcontinent. So on my right is Marcy Juma, a broadcast journalist at the BBC Africa who is based in Nairobi. I'm proud to say that she is a Michael Elliott winner for Excellence in African Storytelling, an award that we started 3 years ago, and I must say she is an amazing reporter. Mijal Iastrebner is the co-founder, on the far left, is the co-founder and managing director of SembraMedia, which I'm also proud to say is a partner of ICFJ, and it's a nonprofit dedicated to increasing diversity of voices and quality content in Spanish. And Priya Ramani is a seasoned Indian reporter and editor who has worked for Reuters, Cosmopolitan, that's an interesting one, and Mint newspaper. She actually was a founding editor of Mint. So let's start with India, where the Me Too movement has caught fire. Some of you may or may not know that Priya was one of the first to call out her editor, or her first editor. So tell us about that anecdote, and then explain to us how and why the movement is getting traction in India.
So the Me Too movement broke in India sometime last October, and it started with people outing a couple of stand-up comics, and then women from the media started speaking, and some of them I follow, so suddenly my timeline was like full of Me Too India in the media. And then a lot of women on my timeline started saying, on my Twitter timeline, started saying, but why isn't anyone naming the big names, you know? What about like people we all know about, but nobody's talking about? And I had a story to share, and I've written the story before, and I sort of thought about it for 24 hours. Like I thought, should I out this man? I had written the story, but I hadn't named the person in the story. And then I just got swept away in the emotion and the trauma and the sort of the catharsis of the moment. And I named this gentleman, who happened to be a minister in the Indian government. And all hell broke loose. Suddenly I was on the other side of the story for the first time in my life. And under my tweet, something like amazing happened. Like so many women started saying, oh, this happened to me also. This is my experience with him. This is what happened to me. And soon there were like at least 10 or 12 women who had spoken up. And then, since we're all journalists and we all write well, soon there were like 4 more women who had written their stories separately about the same gentleman. And he was traveling, and when the story broke, and he said, oh, I'm going to take legal action, this is all lies. And when he came back to India, he filed a criminal defamation suit against me, because I was the first one who had named him. And
you're still fighting that suit, right?
Yeah, it's sort of just started. And so then like 10 other women got pissed off by the fact that he had filed a case against me, or 10 or 15 women, and they wrote a separate letter saying they would testify at my trial. So there's been like at least 30 women who sort of have spoken up or have said this, like they support me and they would like to testify about their experiences, even if they haven't shared their stories yet. And the entire country, like sort of, there was overwhelming support for me. I think probably because of the large numbers of women who had spoken up. And I think everyone believed my story. There was no doubting what I had said. And that's sort of, it's on either side of the political spectrum, like right-wingers, you know, dissenters, everybody was sort of
So tell
backing.
Can we keep the mics on? Because everybody is going to chip in. It's a conversation here. tell the bigger story in India. Why, India has a strong patriarchy, but there seems to be a lot, the Me Too movement seems to have gotten a lot of traction, just as you said in your case. Why is that?
I think it's just it's the digital nature of Me Too and the fact that I mean it's such a powerful hashtag. I mean in India also there was a lot of criticism about the Me Too movement. Like people said it's not inclusive. What about rural women? What about women in small towns? What about Dalit women? This is just privileged women speaking up. But I mean, personally, it's been overwhelming for me. It's such a powerful hashtag, and I think it unites women across the world. If you just search for Me Too on Twitter, you get these overwhelming stories from across the world that all sound the same, and that sort of unite us. And women's anger is so powerful, I think.
Marcy, there doesn't seem to be a lot of traction at all for the Me Too movement in Africa. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think in Africa, while the rest of the world, the Me Too movement really took flight and everybody was talking about it, it didn't get that much traction in Africa. It was talked about on social media. People on Twitter came out and talked about the Me Too movement that is being talked about in the West. But it didn't really resonate with Africa or Kenya or East Africa. The argument is that, first of all, Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania are dealing with totally different issues. The context of the Me Too movement are different in the West than in Africa. Somebody will argue Africa is dealing with child marriages. Some communities are dealing with war, and in Congo, weapons of war, sex, and all that being used, rape being used as a weapon of war. So people have little time to talk about the Me Too movement. But I think what stifled the Me Too movement in most of Africa is because nobody was willing to come up and mention these big names. Somebody would go on Twitter and say, my boss or my former boss grabbed me once in the lifts, or an editor in the newsroom asked me for sex in favor of an editorial position, but nobody would name these editors. Nobody would come out and say, Minister so-and-so, like it happened in India, did this. So when you don't put a name to these accusations, most of the time they just fizzle out, because nobody will then come out and say, me too, he did that to me, or me too, he groped me in a bad way. So I think that is one of the factors that stifled the Me Too movement in Africa. And also, Africa is deeply patriarchal. There is a lot of importance, so to say, that is attached to the man as a being, to the husband as the head of the home. So in many societies, the men have a right, or are perceived to have a right to so many things, including, sorry to say, the body of the woman who lives in the house with him, or the woman next door. So many people would fear to come out and say, I think you touched me, or you said something negative, or I think this amounts to rape, because, hello, this is a man, and I think he should be revered, and as a society, they're the people we look up to. Yeah.
Tell that anecdote about the rape that recently happened in Africa, just as an illustration of what you're talking about.
So, I would say 2-3 months ago, something happened in Kenya. There is a top minister, somebody who governs a whole region in Western Kenya, who was involved in a sexual relationship with a girl who was, yes, above 18, above the age of consent. This was a girl in university from a poor home. This minister was married, and unfortunately the girl got pregnant. And there are a lot of issues that went on, and there are allegations that she was demanding for some things from the minister. It happened the girl was kidnapped, and everything points to the minister and his people being behind the kidnap. Unfortunately, the girl was found 3 days later in a forest, killed, and the unborn baby ripped out of her tummy. Even international media went crazy over that story. But the sad thing is, 80% of people who reported on this story on social media, and sadly on traditional media too, said, oh, she brought it on herself, she was promiscuous. Yeah? Nobody reported on the fact that this is a femicide. Nobody's thinking about it. The girl has been murdered, but the issue was that, oh, she brought it on herself, she was promiscuous. If she had not gotten into a relationship with this man, she would not have ended up the way she did. Forgetting the bigger issue, the elephant in the room, is this girl was murdered, femicide. She was in a relationship with this man. So I personally think that how media reports these issues is also one of the things that have affected the Me Too movement in places where it has not come out strongly. Because media has the power to shape how a story is perceived, and they have the power to shape an agenda. If every media person decided to go with the femicide story, then that is what would have taken off.
We'll get to the media coverage of the issue in a minute, but I'd like you to continue with your discussion about the judicial system and why rapes are rarely tried in courts.
Yes. So, and I think this is an issue that it is not only experienced in Kenya, but a majority of African countries where the judicial system is in a big mess. And even it's everywhere, right? The judicial system is it's flawed. There's a lot of corruption. If I have the money, I can easily buy out a judge. You see? And for Kenya, it takes so many years. It can take even up to 20 years for a case on rape, on defilement to be concluded. So I think people just become tired. Somebody says, even if I go to court, this will take forever. I will probably die before this man is arrested or before justice is given to me. So the judicial system also, in my opinion, contributes to issues about women, about the Me Too movement not being felt because on how it handles the cases, the corruption, and how easy it is for somebody to buy justice, especially if the victim is less privileged, comes from a poor family, comes from the rural area, does not have the power that this other person has. And that is exactly what happened between this girl, who I talked about, the one who was murdered, and this minister. This minister was apprehended for a few days, and he was released. He bailed himself out. The case will be heard sometime in 2021 or 2022. Then there will be a second hearing 6 months later, then a third hearing. Then the evidence will be lost. And this girl is dead. The family is now struggling. She left behind 3 children. The mother comes from a very poor family. But because the perpetrator has the money, that's what matters in the judicial system, sadly.
I'm actually counting on the judicial system in my case. My defense is basically that I spoke the truth and I spoke it in the public interest. That's going to be my defense, and let's see what happens.
But it takes resources to fight that. How do you get, because in many times the powerful use legal cases to either shut you down in a variety of ways. It could be to silence independent voices or to, stop women from pressing on equality issues.
I have an amazing feminist lawyer who's fighting my case pro bono. And so really the only expense that's going into my case is that I have to travel from Bangalore to Delhi ever so often. But it's okay. People wanted to crowdsource and raise money for me and stuff. But I didn't want anyone to think that I did this to get money, and so for now it's good, all good.
Yeah, well.
But you gotta face him. You got to face him now.
Yeah.
And how you feel about that, because having this corrupt, not only corrupt, but having this possibility of being charged of denouncing, it's also re-victimization, and for many of us, it's reliving the trauma with these men also. So it's not only about losing money, time, it's also very draining emotionally.
Midge, can you talk a little bit about some of the pre-Me Too movements in Argentina? Because I think people would be interested to hear about the women's movement there and what's gone on.
in Argentina, it started long ago with a lot of different feminist movements, but in 2015, 2016, a group of female journalists started a movement called Ni Una Menos, not one less woman. And it came up because that way because they were tired of telling telling stories about femicides every single day. The statistics from 2014 to 2015 went from one femicide every 30 hours to one femicide to every 18 hours. So out of this anger they felt, they created Ni Una Menos, and Ni Una Menos ended up being a movement on the streets. All the women went out of the streets and starting really being involved in this news and these movements, and thinking and talking about why there are none statistics about this very serious topic, and we feel like we are not safe. And this ended up bringing the issue on the pro-choice and legislating the abortion, and also the Me Too, which was the last step on this journey for Argentina, because last December we had this big case on Me Too, this very national case on an actor who raped a minor a couple of years ago in Nicaragua. They are both Argentinian, but they were on a work trip. And this case relived a lot of denounces that were made on their time, but nobody listened. And the chain of men that defended this man's job. But Me Too was the last step of our way, and we now have a tradition on going like 4 or 5 times of the year to the street to demand women's right to fight, to ally with each other, to tell each other that we believe each other, that we listen to each other.
Actually, in India too, I mean, Me Too was not the first time women have used the digital space to make a point. In 2017, a law student crowdsourced something she called a Lucia, which was a list of sexual harassers in academia. And men were named without women, there was no, the identity of the women was kept secret. And that sort of became a big story in India.
Wow. Recently, Distintas Latitudes, which is a Mexican media, did a research on harassment and abuse in the universities in Latin America. It's a regional story. And they found out that the 60% of these universities in our region don't have any abuse or harassment protocols. Like, they don't even know what to do about it, and they don't communicate what you should do when this happened to you. And the other 40% have these protocols, but that doesn't mean they use it. So this is also something we should be starting to talk about too, because there's a lot of doubts about how to proceed and which are the consequences on that. And it's not only about believing, it's also about having
Recourse.
Yes, having a system to channel that stories too.
And I think when it comes to the force of the digital world, I think that's where we also have an issue to deal with, because then so many women are left behind. We're talking about women who don't have access to Twitter, who don't have access to
Yes.
Facebook. We are talking about women in war-zone areas, women in the Congo in Africa, women in the in South Sudan, areas where rape is being used as a weapon of war. You know, they don't have the capacity or the digital space that some of us have the privilege of having. So majority of women are still being left behind, I would say, for Africa in this movement because of such things. They just don't have the privilege that we have on Twitter and Facebook. So the big question is then how, again, do we get this movement to them?
Actually, in India, only 27% of women work in the formal sort of ecosystem. But like the history of, in the history of sexual discrimination laws and stuff, workplace harassment laws, in the 90s, there was this Dalit woman who was fighting for against child marriage. And she was gang raped. Her name was Bhavri Devi. And then the courts treated the case really badly. And then a couple of, few feminist NGOs got together and they filed a case. And then the workplace harassment laws came into effect in India in 1997. So,
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about media coverage of the issue and the Me Too movement. How is it covered? First, let's start with major media before we get to digital startups. How would you rate the coverage, and what are the issues as you see it, so in your parts of the world? Go ahead.
It's definitely is changing right now in Argentina. In Latin America in general, there's a lot of patriarchy. There's a lot of difficulties, not only in trusting the stories, but also in telling the story right, using the right words, trying to really do good journalism on the story. And there is also this trying to be objective. Traditional media usually use both voices, and giving the voice to the victimizer, it's also a problem. And this is, it's still, there's a lot of patriarchy, and there's a lot of power moves. There's a lot of men running the media in Latin America, so there's a lot of fraternity that it's difficult to fight and to change, but it's definitely changing. And that's why in Argentina, SembraMedia joined other wonderful organizations for women, and we started not only observing what is going on with gender in media, but also trying to propose what we would like to see in those media. This organization is today called GENMA, and it was launched in December, and we are trying to figure it out. How can we start changing these whole habits, which are the best practices, and which how can all avoid being specialists that only talk about gender, but how can we all speak respectfully about these stories?
Well, you said there was some progress made. Are there any specific cases where newsrooms have changed their?
Yes, there's Página 12 in Argentina is one of the biggest newspaper, and it has a really long story with a gender agenda and a gender point of view. And they started changing this a long time ago. They are the pioneers. But they created a generation of new journalists, mostly women, that really got a new way of telling these stories, that it's more careful, more respectful, more. And this last year, in December, when this Me Too big case of Thelma Fardin which was the actress raped by this other actor, came out. There was a lot of coverage on the topic, and there was a lot of serious coverage. And also, there was bad coverage also, like always, but there was a lot of, I think media raised up to the occasion and really started thinking, like, how can we manage our newsroom to start telling this type of stories well? And there's a couple of new gender editors in the news, which is other big change. There are not a lot of them, but that's another step newsroom are taking.
Mercy, I cut you off before when you started to talk about that, so why don't you complete your thoughts?
So in Kenya and definitely most of Africa, I wouldn't say there's a lot changing, especially in the newsroom setting or in the media as an organization. I haven't yet seen or heard any woman who's come out and vocally talked about a senior editor who made sexual advances or who abused her. Yet, we know there are so many of these cases. And when it comes to reporting cases of femicide or cases of sexual abuse against women, yes, these stories have made headlines. But the big question is, where's the focus? What is the agenda being set by the media? What are they driving the community and the society to talk about? Like when I talked about the case of the girl, when a girl is murdered and you start talking about, oh, she was promiscuous, I don't think, in my opinion, it justifies the murder. And that is what the media sadly is doing. You are sanitizing the act by trying to say, she brought it on herself, the girl was promiscuous. Sadly, even in the case of the minister, one newspaper, a very prominent newspaper, started talking about the diet in jail that this man is going to have, instead of talking about the atrocious act that has been committed to this woman. So I think as the media, we get it wrong when it comes to reporting these issues, talking about these issues, because the media has the capacity to shape an agenda. There's a very big way in which we can frame news for the consumer, how we want them to. So if the headlines talk about how promiscuous she was, definitely the next day, that is what you will be discussing in the house, that is what you will be discussing in school. But if the media today decides to really come out strongly about, hey, this case was a femicide, this was a murder, definitely that's what you'll be talking about.
Is this an issue of the lack of women leaders at the top of news organizations in Kenya and Africa? Is this a direct
Definitely, I think that's a major issue, because if a woman editor is at the helm, there is a very big probability or chance that these are the kinds of stories she would advocate to be on the headline on the top of the newspaper. So definitely, we do lack a good representation when it comes to editorial positions in newsrooms in Kenya and Africa. But that is not even the case. The only case. The other issue is that there is a big drive for politics. People would, or the newsrooms would prefer talking about politics or putting politics on page 1 to 4, the first pages of the newspaper, than putting women issues there, because everybody is looking to sell their newspaper. And what sells? Politics sells. Yeah? So we are not talking much about these issues as media. And if we are not putting them on the right pages, the headlines, the fast stories on the TV. We are putting them story 15 on the TV when everybody has already done the news, they've gone to do the dishes. So that is the big issue in Kenya and Africa.
Mm-hmm. How about India?
So as far as my story goes, a lot of newspapers ignored it in the beginning. And then there was like so many women talking about the same man that they were forced to cover it. I'm talking about mainstream papers. And there's been no sort of sustained coverage of my case. It's sort of always a brief, only in the mainstream news. Right. The digital media is covering it well. And one thing that struck me actually when the case broke was that I got messages from every possible person that I've encountered in my 20 years in journalism, except 3 former editors that I had worked with. And I was like, and like I consider myself close to these editors, you know, and like I thought about it a lot, and I thought they probably haven't messaged because they are struggling with the same issues in their newsrooms, you know. So,
Well, let's talk a little bit about digital media and digital media startups, because Mij, you were talking about, this is a kind of a bright spot here.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us about that?
In SembraMedia, we study digital media, what they are covering, their business model, how to become sustainable, and we were studying media in Latin America, and we found out that almost the half of the media were run by women, were founded and led by women, and we clearly see that women's rights and this type of topics come up, and not only women's rights, these type of stories, but also like uncover cultures and what do they do to women, and what which roles women played in different countries and cultures, and there's a lot of topics inside women's rights, and we saw that has an effect on their agenda, that has an effect on employing other women working with other women, paying other women, and we clearly see a feminist agenda across the region. There are a lot of digital news outlets that call themselves feminists, like without fear. And that's shifting the agenda, and they are starting to affect the traditional media. This is like the outside to the inside movement, and also since the traditional media is struggling like everywhere else, they are also trendsetters and influencers, and they are provoking change.
Yeah, I should add that a lot of the independent the new startups in some of these countries are the only source of independent news, right?
Exactly.
So a lot of people are going there to really find out what's going on, rather than reading or watching a show that was in the government's pocket.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's not only the case. They also find more trained journalists on these topics. So it's not only that they are able to tell the story at all. They find people that believe and take care and don't expose in a risky way the victims. That's very important too in the process.
One of my former bosses even commissioned a story about the minister's lawyer and what a great lawyer she was.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, why don't we take some questions from the audience? I'd be happy to entertain. Yes, please. Hi. Just tell us who you are and. Okay.
Hi. Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm one of the volunteers. I was wondering, if I had to see a thread between what made Me Too work in Argentina and in India, and what are the challenges in Africa and in Kenya, is perhaps the strength in number dimension of things. And it's sort of, especially for women who don't feel as powerful, who don't see direct outlets to push for their stories, to speak up. It really made a difference for you that people were willing to crowdfund, that people told their stories about the same person, etc. And in Argentina, people went on the streets, it was big numbers, etc. So I'm wondering, what do you see as challenges to more collective movements forming in Kenya and other parts of Africa? And yes, that's my question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the major challenge in Kenya for the Me Too movement and why it has been hard to get maybe the traction that has been received in other countries is because, and I would insist on this, nobody is willing to mention names. So that is a major challenge because when you go on Twitter and just talk about this boss who doesn't have a name, who sexually abused you, it is very hard for somebody in another town in Kenya to put a face to that tweet or whatever you're talking about. I think what made a big difference for her is because she was vocal enough and brave enough to come and say, it is so and so who did it. And that's why all these 30 women came out and said, me too, he did the same, me too, he did the same. If she didn't mention the name, I don't think she would have gotten the response that she gotten. So I think women in Kenya and Africa are still afraid of victimization, of the stigma, of the damage, so to say, that will accompany their decision to come out. Because definitely there are people who will come out and say she's lying. There will be defamation suits. The other question is, many women ask is, am I capable of really pushing through this, defending myself? Will I get people to back me up? And do I have the strength to withstand the social stigma, the abuses that come with it? Because it's never a smooth road. I'm pretty sure there are people who've been against your decision and there are people who said you're lying, including the minister himself. So yes, just to answer your question, the biggest issue for Kenya and Africa and those countries where Me Too has not taken flight is because people are not willing to mention names. Yeah.
And it's hard to mention the names of the powerful, there's no question. It took you a year, right? I mean, what triggered, you said you wrote an article about it, but didn't name names, and that didn't get the same traction as when you actually did, correct?
Yes. I only named him because as part of the Me Too movement.
Right.
So am I right to say that if the Me Too movement had not taken up, you would still not have mentioned him today?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a major.
Although
major
I have named him to many of my former colleagues and talked about him. A lot of people have heard this story from me before.
Yeah, but it wasn't
Yeah.
public.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
I think there's also a really main component in all of this, which is the sorority. Allying with another woman and being heard and accompanied through this. This is a process. You don't immediately denounce and call out a powerful harasser. You obviously need to prepare yourself because there are going to be lawsuits and consequences in your workplace, in your career. So having an army of, I'm telling this like in a good way, like going out knowing that there's a lot of women that understands you, that they're ready to respond to what you're saying. And not only the one that came out and said, like, this happened to me too, there's also another woman that I haven't gone through that, but I totally understand it, and I think you deserve justice. I think that's very important. In this case, from Argentina, the Me Too case came out because this actress, Thelma, went to an actress committee, what do you say? Actrices Argentinas, it's like a group of actresses that want to push for women's rights. And they went through a whole process that took months. They got her a lawyer. They prepared a statement, a video. They organized a conference. They really prepared her to face that challenge and did this together. And I think that's very important to support each other. If we have each other, we can go further.
Yeah, building an infrastructure to fight these things, yes.
The support from the sisterhood has been overwhelming, but also from men who suddenly realize the scale of what women go through. You know, a lot of men in my life, I think, they're sort of still slightly helpless and figuring out how to respond to it. But
Yeah, I do want to thank the men in the audience, even though there aren't that many of them, because we need you. No, we do. We need your voices, and we need your participation and your strength, and the fact that you're here is a testament to your interest in supporting the issue. Any other questions? Yes, Annette. Yes, identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name's Annette Young. Excuse me, I've got the head cold from hell. I'm the host of the 51% on France 24 television. My first question is to you, Priya. We have covered in our show, which is about women reshaping the world, the fact that in India, female participation in the workforce has dropped somewhere in the order of from 35% to, I think, as you said, 27 from 2005 to now. The direct result, many say, of sexual harassment at work. So I'm curious to know, with that in mind, how does one frame the Me Too movement in terms of moving things forward, talking to men in suits, men in power, that in order for your economy to flourish, it is important to have proper female participation in the workforce. So what does one do in order to create safe work environments? So I'd like to know your response to that. A broader question, I'm sorry, for all of you on the panel. In the Global South, as you pointed out, Mercy, you're dealing with survival issues, and you know the notion of Me Too falls way down in the list of priorities. What do you think in your various communities can be done to propel the movement forward, and also make newsrooms, be it in the traditional form or in the digital startups, dare I also say, many of whom are still dominated by young men in jeans and sneakers who are still struggling to wrap their heads around what Me Too means? How can you push it forward for them to understand the importance of covering stories like this?
Great. All right, who wants to start? You want to answer the first question?
So it's an overwhelming issue to tackle, but it's estimated that if women's unpaid work were assigned a monetary value, it would constitute between 10% and 39% of GDP. You know, so I don't know, just having more of these conversations, in workplace. It's like hopeless, but you sort of keep chipping away at it, you know. And I think like digital media helps spread the word, and I've got a lot of response from younger women, like who at least are exposed to what's okay and what's not okay, and that it's okay to speak up about this. I mean, nobody told me that when, like, some of the older journalists in India say, oh, you know, we just dealt with it quietly, we just slapped him, and, you know. But now at least we're having a conversation about it, which wasn't there. And it's a global conversation. Also, political participation of women, you know, I mean, forcing political parties to have at least 33% representation of women. There's a bill that's due to be passed in India, hopefully. They've been promising they'll pass it for like 5 years, but it's just like small acts of bravery and...
Yeah, go ahead.
I completely agree that in the digital media, independent digital media, there are also a lot of patriarchy. It's not like we got there and we change everything. I absolutely think that in terms of opportunities and communication and involvement on the topic, there's a lot of we can learn from that ecosystem. But having said that, I think there's a great, since we are having this conversation, I think we now can start learning how to manage this and how to integrate this as our philosophy, like how our work philosophy. How we behave in the newsroom, not only as consent and the basic stuff, but also how do we listen to each other, do we collaborate, are we considering others' opinions, and that's also mind shift we have to do. It's larger than this Me Too movement, and that's why we are starting to collaborate and create these coalitions like GENMA in Argentina, because we think it's important to talk amongst different players in the industry and start talking to everybody else to hear what is difficult, which are the challenges, and where are the opportunities we can take to further the conversation.
Okay, I feel for me that, yes, like you say, there are many other issues that women and the society in general is dealing with, including the FGM, child marriages, and all that. So such hashtags come way, way below the priority list. But for me, I think the changes will start with our institutions. That's where the major change will start. Revamping systems like the judiciary, not only in Africa, but in all these countries who have mentioned that there are issues with their legal system, their judicial systems. But the starting point, I think, would begin with every person, every single person in this room. Joyce started by talking about us making the abnormal seem normal. It is high time that we as women, as men in this room, emphasize on the fact why the abnormal needs to remain abnormal. Why I shouldn't laugh off when somebody, touches my bum. And I'm like, When we stop doing that is when we'll start seeing the change that we are so strongly advocating for. So it starts with that, like she says, small acts of bravery. Being able to call out that man, or for the main, that lady, that boss, senior lady who is making advances and telling her, this is abnormal, let's keep it that way. Stop normalizing the atrocities that are being committed to young women and men. Let's not narrow this to women. So it starts with us. I think that is where we will make any improvement if we want to in the Me Too campaign. And lastly, I would say media. You are in the media. It starts with you. It starts with me. How do we look at these stories? How long are we able to sustain these stories? Are we just going to cover it day one and then there is no day two and day three journalism? So many issues come into play if we want to see this going beyond what it is today.
Mercy, let me ask you one other thing. The issue of female genital mutilation has gotten traction. So there's some, it's not Me Too, it's not workplace harassment, but it is a huge issue that affects hundreds of millions of women, and it has gained some momentum, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is sort of a platform to build on that, correct? Do you want
Yes.
to talk a little bit about that? Because it's not like there's nothing happening. This is pretty significant.
It is. There's a lot happening when it comes to female genital mutilation, not only in Kenya, but in the whole of Africa. In Kenya, we have amazing people doing amazing things, fighting for girls in the communities. We have young girls coming up with apps that can be used to report cases or threats of female genital mutilation. And a lot of money has been poured into just ensuring that this practice comes to an end, because it's denying a lot of girls the joy of being children, the joy of education, and the right of education, and the right of waiting until the age of consent, whether it's 16 or 18, to be able to decide for themselves why they need to do some things or not. So a lot is going into that. But sadly, it is not still the whole of Africa. In February, I was in Liberia, and the former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, had banned FGM in Liberia last year in February. Sadly, she only banned it for 1 year. So in February, the ban ended. You guys can guess what's happening in Liberia now. It's like everybody was waiting for this ban to end. We are counting down. The ban on FGM is almost coming to an end. It's now back in force, and it's a sad state of affairs where girls, not even girls, sorry to say girls, babies as young as 9 months old are being taken into the forest. FGM is like their genital parts are mutilated, and they have to stay in the forest until somebody pays bride price for them. I met a girl who comes out of the forest. She's been living like an animal. She doesn't even understand what's happening in the world. She's been there since she was 3 years old, comes out when she's 16 years old. It's absurd, it's wrong, and yes, it starts with you, it starts with us. We need, if there are Africans in here, these are the things we need to be championing to put an end to.
Okay, I think we're at our hour, but I want to thank the excellent panelists from around the world, and I want to make a statement about let's not accept the abnormal as normal. Thank you.